Hamza was advancing toward a man of the Quraysh, Siba bin Abdul Uzza.
In Arabia, it was customary for women to perform circumcision of male children.
According to the historian Ibn Hisham, circumcision was already a tradition among the Arabs before Islam. The Siba whom Hamza challenged was the son of a woman who performed circumcisions.
O son of the circumcising woman, look at me for the last time.
Siba bin Abdul Uzza advanced toward Hamza. His face was red with anger. He was a master of sword and shield fighting. Hamza was also not to be underestimated. The two approached each other and began to strike. Their shields were blocking the blows. They attacked from different angles, but the shields always got in the way. At that moment, Wahshi bin Harb was slowly creeping toward them.
The ground and bushes provided him with cover. Hamza was looking into the eyes of his enemy. He saw nothing but Siba. Wahshi got close enough to a point where his spear couldn't miss. He stood up and balanced the spear in his hand, then brought it into the throwing position. Hamza made 2 or 3 swift strikes at Siba. The final blow was so strong that Hamza's sword pierced through Siba's stomach. Hamza pulled out his sword in a way that tore Siba's stomach even more, and he fell at Hamza's feet. Hamza had just regained his stance when Wahshi threw his spear with full force. The distance was very short. The spear penetrated Hamza's stomach so deeply that its tip emerged from his back. Hamza didn't fall. He looked around and saw Wahshi. With the spear still in his body, Hamza moved towards Wahshi. Wahshi stood his ground. Hamza took 4 or 5 steps before collapsing. Wahshi watched his body move until it stopped. When the movement ceased, Wahshi approached him. Hamza had been martyred. Wahshi pulled the spear out of his body and left. He then began searching for Hind and his master, Jubair bin Mut'im. Khalid remembered the battle and felt a weight on his heart. His horse kept moving. He was passing through a low area, so the top of Mount Uhud disappeared from his sight. He remembered the women of his tribe who were inciting the Quraysh and their allied tribes. Khalid recalled climbing a high place to observe the battle. He saw the Muslim women. The Muslims were bringing their wounded back, and the women were tending to them, bandaging their wounds and giving them water. There were 14 women with the Muslims, including Hazrat Fatima. Then it happened that the small number of fighters triumphed over the large number of infidels. The Quraysh's flag-bearer fell, and someone else picked up the flag. He too fell. The flag fell several times. Finally, a slave raised the flag, but he too was killed. Then the Muslims gave the Quraysh no opportunity to raise their flag. The Quraysh's morale broke. Khalid saw their retreat and also saw the Muslims pursuing them. The Quraysh didn't even stay in their camp. They fled in panic, abandoning their goods and belongings. This marked the start of the post-battle phase. The Muslims began looting the Quraysh camp in celebration of their victory and out of a sense of revenge. They were shouting victory slogans. The Quraysh were so confused and frightened that they even forgot about their women. The women fled on foot, but the Muslims didn't even glance at them. One group of horsemen of the Quraysh was commanded by Ikrimah and the other by Khalid. They were supposed to attack the flanks of the Muslims, but the tide of the battle had turned drastically. Even then, Ikrimah and Khalid kept their horsemen ready where they had been positioned. Khalid, despite the situation, hoped he could turn the defeat into victory. However, the path he had to take was guarded by Muslim archers. When these archers, positioned on a high ground, saw that the Quraysh had fled and their comrades were collecting the spoils, they began to abandon their positions. Their commander, Abdullah bin Jubair, told them, "Do not disobey the orders of the Prophet. He commanded you not to leave your posts under any circumstances." But the archers, shouting, descended from the hill named Ainain by historians. "Spoils! Spoils! Victory is ours! Only 9 archers remained with Abdullah bin Jubair. Khalid watched this scene, feeling as if he were dreaming. This was exactly what he wanted. He observed the archers. When they reached the Quraysh camp, he attacked the hill where Abdullah bin Jubair and his 9 archers remained. Khalid could have ignored them, but he wanted revenge. His horsemen ascended the hill. The archers were quickly shooting arrows. Ikrimah, seeing Khalid attack Ainain, also led his horsemen up the hill. The horsemen had bows as well and were shooting upwards, but the few archers couldn't stop so many horsemen. The horsemen reached the top. The archers fought hand to hand and fell wounded. Khalid threw the wounded down the hill. Abdullah bin Jubair was also martyred. From there, Khalid and Ikrimah led their horsemen to the position from where the Muslims had begun the battle. On Khalid's orders, they attacked the Muslims together. The Muslims were not in a state to fight, but the Prophet had kept some fighters with him. These fighters stood firm against the horsemen. The women who had come with the Quraysh had fled, but a woman named Amra had hidden nearby. When she saw the Quraysh horsemen attacking the Muslims, she noticed the Quraysh standard lying on the ground. She picked it up and raised it. Abu Sufyan had regained control of his retreating infantry. When he saw their flag waving, he shouted the slogans, "Long live Hubal" and "Long live Lat," and brought the infantry back, encircling the Muslims. Khalid was arriving on time. He was searching for Muhammad, and today, 4 years later, he was going to Medina. The Prophet's influence was dominant on his mind. The peak of Uhud was emerging from the horizon, and Khalid's horse was walking leisurely. Khalid's mental state was such that sometimes he seemed in no hurry to move forward, and sometimes he would surprise his steed as if he needed to reach quickly. However, the destination he was heading towards was not yet fully clear to him. Sometimes he felt as if a magnetic force was pulling him forward, and sometimes he felt a force rising from within, pushing him back. "Khalid!" He heard a voice that rose from within him, but he took it as real and pulled the reins, looking around. There was nothing but sand, yet the voice was there. "Khalid, is it true what I heard?" Khalid recognized the voice. It was his companion Ikrimah. Just a day before, Ikrimah had told him, "If you think that Muhammad is not a prophet sent by God, rid yourself of that thought. Muhammad is the killer of many of our relatives. Look at our tribe, who have sworn to kill Muhammad before sunset." Khalid gave a slight jerk to the reins, and the horse started moving. His mind drifted back 4 years to when he was searching for the Prophet in the Battle of Uhud. He was determined to fulfill the Quraysh's vow to kill the Prophet before sunset. He recalled how, when the Muslim archers abandoned Mount Ainain, he attacked the mount, killing Abdullah bin Jubair and his 9 archers who had remained in obedience to the Prophet's command. The fleeing Quraysh had then regrouped and reorganized themselves. The Muslims had lost the battle, a consequence of their disobedience to the Prophet's orders. Khalid and Abu Jahl's son, Ikrimah, were experts in warfare. Killing each Muslim was no longer difficult for them. Khalid saw that the Muslims had split into 2 groups. The larger group was cut off from their commander, the Prophet. A few archers were still with the Prophet. These were the companions who had not panicked in the face of the Quraysh's attack. Their number was 30. Among them were Abu Dujana, Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, Ali, Abdul Rahman bin Auf, Abu Bakr Siddiq, Abu Ubaidah, Talha bin Abdullah, and Mus'ab bin Umair, who were particularly notable. Of the 14 women who had come to tend to the wounded, 2 were with the Prophet. One was Amara, and the other was a black woman named Ayman. Ayman had been the Prophet's nurse during his childhood. The remaining 12 women were still busy tending to and bringing back the wounded and dressing their wounds. Khalid was searching for the messenger of God, but he could not roam much in the battlefield because he commanded a cavalry unit that he kept under strict discipline. He did not believe in reckless attacks. His principle was to strike the enemy at such a vulnerable point that they would surrender before the second strike. Today, 4 years later, as he was traveling alone in the desert, horses were galloping in his mind. He could hear the sounds of arrows and bows. The cries of Muslims echoed in his head. He thought that Muslims were shouting to show that they were not afraid of death. A smile of sarcasm and hatred appeared on his lips. He had resolved to kill as many Muslims as possible and take few prisoners. He still did not know where the messenger was. He saw that Abu Sufyan, who had returned with the fleeing Quraysh, had attacked a large part of the Muslim army, and the Muslims were fighting fiercely. The Muslims, considering it the last battle of their lives, displayed such bravery and fearlessness that the Quraysh were greatly troubled. Seeing this situation, Khalid became furious. He ordered his riders to attack the Muslims. He sheathed his sword and took a spear in his hand. He attacked the Muslims from behind, picking them off one by one with his spear. Whenever his spear entered a Muslim's body, he would shout, "I am Abu Sulaiman." With each thrust of his spear, his cry was heard, "I am Abu Sulaiman." Today, 4 years later, as he was heading towards the Muslim center in Medina, he could still hear his own cry, "I am Abu Sulaiman." He could not remember how many Muslims his spear had pierced. He had forgotten about the messenger of God. Shortly afterwards, he learned that the Muslims had broken ranks from their prophet's command and that Ikrimah had moved towards the Muslims' prophet. The reality was that the command of the messenger of God had indeed ended, and the situation had become such that Muhammad could no longer reorganize the Muslims. However, they were not willing to leave the battlefield to save their own lives and those of their companions. Although the situation was such that retreat was the only option, they were still trying to move to a better position. Muhammad knew that the Quraysh would be searching for him and that a severe attack was about to be launched on his group. Muhammad began moving towards a hill. His companions had formed a protective circle around him. He had only gone a short distance when Ikrimah, with his horsemen, attacked him. Somehow, a Quraysh infantry unit found out that Ikrimah had attacked the messenger of God, so this infantry unit also fell upon their group. The question of Muhammad or any of his companions escaping seemed out of the question. 30 of Muhammad's companions and 2 women who were with them formed a close protective wall around him. Khalid remembered that the messenger of God was also known for his physical strength. The greatest proof of this was that he had thrown down the renowned Arab wrestler Rukana 3 times. Now it was time for another display of his strength on the battlefield. The human wall that his devotees had formed around him was broken by Muhammad himself. He had a bow in his hand and arrows in his quiver. At that time, Khalid was engaged with the main part of the Muslim force. He was told later that when the messenger of God, his companions, and the 2 women stood firm against the Quraysh horsemen and infantry, Khalid had a hard time believing it. He repeatedly said that this could not be physical strength. It must be some other kind of strength. Since then, one question had been troubling him. Could belief become strength? He couldn't ask this question to anyone in his tribe because he could immediately be accused of being affected by Muhammad's magic. Today, with this question in his mind, he was heading towards Medina. The hill of Uhud was rising above the horizon. Memories from 4 years ago took him back to the base of that hill where he could hear his own name being called, "Abu Sulaiman, Abu Sulaiman." He began to imagine how those 30 men and 2 women had managed to hold off so many horsemen and infantry. The messenger of God was also shooting arrows with his blessed hand. His companions would zealously form a circle around him. According to a historian of the battles, Maghazi, he would repeatedly break through the circle and shoot arrows at the approaching enemy. His physical strength was far greater than that of an average person. Muhammad pulled his bow with such force that the arrows he shot would pierce through the body they struck and emerge from the other side. He shot so many arrows that when he pulled the bow to shoot another, it broke. Muhammad then handed the remaining arrows in his quiver to Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, whose marksmanship was unmatched. Even Muhammad acknowledged Sa'd's accuracy. Meanwhile, Muslims were being cut down by Abu Sufyan and Khalid's forces, fighting until the last drop of blood was shed. The ferocity of Muhammad's devotees and the 2 women was such that it seemed their spirits, not just their bodies, were fighting. The famous historian Tabari wrote that each Muslim fought 4 or 5 Quraysh at once. Their fighting style was so terrifying that the Quraysh either retreated or the lone attacking Muslim, overwhelmed by wounds, fell. Seeing the valor of the Prophet's devotees, the Quraysh fell back and started showering them with arrows and stones. A few Quraysh horsemen charged towards Muhammad, but his companions' arrows pierced their bodies, forcing them to retreat. To counter this, the Quraysh began a relentless barrage of arrows and stones from all sides. Ikrimah had told Khalid that Abu Dujana stood in front of Muhammad with his back to the enemy. Abu Dujana was simultaneously handing his arrows to Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas, who was rapidly shooting them and shielding Muhammad from the incoming arrows. In the downpour of arrows and stones, no one could see what state Abu Dujana was in. When he fell, it was seen that his back was so riddled with arrows that it looked like the back of a porcupine. Many of Muhammad's companions sacrificed their lives to protect him. However, Ikrimah and his horsemen and infantry were so terror-stricken that they retreated. The Quraysh were also getting tired. The messenger of God surveyed his companions. There was blood everywhere, but there was no opportunity to tend to the wounded or provide first aid. The enemy was preparing to launch another assault. "I am waiting for one more man from the Quraysh," the Prophet said to his companions. "Who is he, O Messenger of Allah?" one of his companions asked. "Is he coming to help us?" "No," the Prophet replied. "He is coming to kill me. He should have arrived by now." "But who is he?" the companion asked. "Ubay bin Khalaf," the Prophet said. Ubay bin Khalaf was one of the staunchest opponents of the Prophet. He was a resident of Medina. When he learned that the Prophet had claimed prophethood, he came to mock him one day. The Prophet patiently invited him to accept Islam. "Do you think I am so weak that I would accept your baseless belief?" Ubay bin Khalaf said arrogantly, "Listen carefully, Muhammad. One day I will show you my horse, which I am fattening up for the time when you challenge the Quraysh again. Forget your dreams of Badr. I will be riding that horse, and you will see me in the battlefield, and I swear by my gods that I will kill you with my own hands." The Prophet smiled and said, "Life and death are in the hands of Allah, who has granted me prophethood and assigned me the duty to guide the misguided to the right path. Do not say something that only Allah can fulfill. It could also happen that you come to kill me, but you are killed by my hands." Ubay bin Khalaf laughed mockingly at the Prophet's words and walked away, sneering. Now during this battle, the Prophet remembered Ubay bin Khalaf. As soon as he mentioned his name, a horse came galloping from a distance. Everyone looked in that direction. "My dear companions," the Prophet said to his companions, I feel that this rider approaching us is Ubay. If it is indeed Ubay, do not stop him. Let him come near me." Historians Waqidi, Maghazi, and Ibn Hisham wrote that the rider was indeed Ubay bin Khalaf. He shouted, "Get ready, Muhammad. Ubay has arrived. Look, I am riding the very horse I showed you." "O Messenger of Allah," 3 or 4 of the Prophet's companions stepped forward and said, "Allow us to kill him before he gets close to you." "No," the Prophet said. "Let him come. Let him come near me. Give him passage." The Prophet was wearing a helmet with chains that hung down the sides of his face. He held a spear in his hand, and his sword was sheathed. Ubay's horse came closer. "Come forward, Ubay!" the Prophet challenged. "No one but me will fight you." Ubay ibn Khalaf brought his horse close and laughed scornfully. He was confident that he would kill the Prophet. His sword was still sheathed. The Prophet moved towards him. Ubay was on a powerful horse, while the Prophet was on the ground. As Ubay drew his sword, the Prophet leaped and struck him with his spear. Ubay tried to dodge, but the spear's tip hit his right shoulder below the collarbone. He fell from his horse, breaking his ribs. Historians note that the Prophet's strike was not severe enough to incapacitate a man as robust as Ubay. The Prophet ran towards him to strike again. Ubay had fallen on the other side of his horse. He was possibly gripped by terror or shocked by the unexpected strike. He got up, left his horse, and fled. He was shouting, "Muhammad has killed me, O people of Quraysh! Muhammad has killed me!" Some of the Quraysh inspected his wound and reassured him that it was not fatal. The wound was indeed minor. But Ubay was in such a state that he kept repeating, "I will not survive. Muhammad said he would kill me." Historian Ibn Hisham even wrote that Ubay said, "If Muhammad had only spit on me, I would not have survived." When the Battle of Uhud ended, Ubay joined the Quraysh in their retreat to Mecca. On their way, they made a camp, and Ubay died there. Khalid remembered that moment as if it were yesterday, 4 years ago.